Let's start with the open after the last regular season week for the NFL, trying to figure out what happened last night in Vegas, which is usually not related to football, but in this case, absolutely, with the Chargers and Raiders going to overtime and the Raiders walking off with a field goal. So leading up, as we all know, there was a lot of talk about the tie part of this, where there's a scenario where if the Chargers and Raiders tied, they would both be in the playoffs, so why not go ahead and do that? The Colts getting stomped as 16.5-point favorites against Jacksonville, Pittsburgh taking care of their end of things with Roethlisberger beating Baltimore. So there was like all these things, and we're like, hey, do you realize this could happen? And now we're sitting there, throughout the closing moments of earlier Sunday games going, okay, would the Chargers and Raiders actually do this? And there are people that believe that they could or that they should because it makes sense. Hey, well, if we just tie, we're both going to be in it. First of all, let's just get this out of the way. Do you know how fucking impossible that would be? Do you know how hard that would be before kickoff to decide to play for the tie? Now, you could sit there and say maybe if it was a Jeff Fisher, Jack Del Rio matchup where they'd be going, hey, if this is close towards the end, one of us just want to take a knee. All right, I got your word on that because there's some kind of relationship. Like maybe, right? Maybe that would happen. But to kick the game off and think you'd be able to kind of have a sequence of series and decisions hoping to land on a tie would be impossible. You would, like last night, have a better chance of tying by not trying to do it. And the Raiders get up late and you're thinking, all right, this isn't going to be an issue. They're up, what are we talking, 29-22. Then Herbert, who's unbelievable, starts putting on a show the last few minutes of the fourth quarter. They get this thing tied up. It's 29 apiece, and we're headed to overtime. Both teams exchange field goals. Chargers kick off to the Raiders, about 4.5 minutes left to go in overtime. So Raiders starting at their own 25. Now they have to move the football here, right? They have to move the football because clearly they're not only maybe possibly trying to still win this game, but they don't want to give the ball back to the Chargers. And they do move the football. They get a pass to Edwards for 17 yards. Jacobs up the middle for another 7 yards. There's a 3rd and 8, the Zay Jones pass. What a throw by Carr, who probably deserves more credit than he's given. And now we're at the 2-minute warning, and it's a 1st and 10 at the Chargers 45. So now, with the timeout situation with the Chargers, which normally in this case, it'd be calling timeouts or they wouldn't be brooding. There's no other version of this where you'd be the team without the football going, not only do we not want the ball back, we also want the clock to run out. So that was something for all of us to kind of take a leap of faith on, understanding that the strategy for this would be entirely different. So 1st and 10, Jacobs stuffed. 2nd and 11, Jacobs left tackle for 7 yards. And that in that moment, Jacobs is tackled at 1:14 left. No timeout is called. It's going to be 3rd and 4. We're running into about 4 or 5 seconds left on the play clock. And Brandon Staley and the Chargers call a timeout with 38 seconds left. Now, on the broadcast, and I'll admit, too, I didn't quite know what was going on because, again, these are different circumstances. And to think in that moment, you knew everything that was happening, what the Raiders were thinking, what the Chargers were thinking, what Staley was thinking, what the OC was thinking. For all of us to assume that at home on the couch is probably a big mistake. And it kind of gets back to my big point that I've brought up numerous times, that in the moment is probably when we're at our worst. And we usually need to sleep on things a little bit more. And I know last night I was confused. And I said, hey, I went back and watched the timeout over and over again. Like, clearly they weren't, were they trying to stop the clock, or was it, if they were trying to stop the clock, why are you not calling the timeout when Jacobs is tackled? And it's like, well, okay, we started to learn more a little bit later on, which we will get to. So at that moment, it's 3rd and 4. The timeout is called. We're underneath the play clock. What happened when they lined up in 3rd and 4? Well, they were lined up in shotgun, so they weren't taking a knee. So let's all be on the same page here, because there's still a little gray area with some of this stuff. But for the most part, it got pretty buttoned up once we heard from Staley and Bisaccia, the Raiders head coach, and Carr on top of that. All right, so it's 3rd and 4, and they were lined up in shotgun. And Mitchell Schwartz, who was really good on this stuff, and to the point where I was kind of just making sure I knew what I was doing. I talked to him last night, former tackle for the Chiefs, and then his observations been picked up. And that Colton Miller, the left tackle for the Raiders, he was saying stance alone, like they were going to run a play and they were probably going to hand it off again. Now, Staley calls the timeout, and Al Michaels and Chris Collinsworth are like, wait a minute, all right? And they lost it, and I think that was kind of the lighter fluid on everyone's reaction last night, whereas once Jacobs is tackled, if they don't call the timeout, we're underneath the play clock, that the Raiders are just going to go ahead and take a knee. But if they were lined up in shotgun before Staley called the timeout, almost anyone who's really into football will tell you that was not the case. You're not taking a knee there. All right, look all that stuff up. If you don't believe me, look at the people that actually played and have covered football much longer than I have. You're not taking a knee in that place. So at that point, Staley's calling the timeout with one simple goal: to stop them on 3rd and 4, hoping that if they stop them, then they have a decision on 4th down at a 57-yard field goal, which the conversion rate is under 50%, where when they ended up kicking the field goal from 47, I think the conversion rate there is like 70-something%, right? It's a big, big gap. And I don't know if the Raiders are actually going to go ahead and kick the field goal. But remember, the reason I was confused on the timeout was like, well, this doesn't really make any sense, because if they'd wanted the ball back, they would have called it at 114. The Chargers didn't even want the ball back necessarily. They wanted to force the Raiders into a decision that either wasn't a field goal or a different 3rd down look, right? And again, you could sit there and say, well, the Chargers were going to get it back on a punt or whatever. It wasn't to get the ball back on a punt and then be like, all right, let's start spreading out 5 wide and see if we can push the ball up the field here in a matter of seconds. Not likely. So then on the timeout, there was another part where Linval Joseph comes onto the field for Murray, the linebacker, because they wanted to go bigger personnel. So the Raiders apparently see that, and then they decide to line up in a different formation. And Jacobs, which is lost in all of this on 3rd and 4, puts together a great run for 10 yards and gets it to the Chargers 29. They run the clock down to a couple seconds, kick a 47-yard field goal, and now the Raiders are not playing the Chiefs. They're playing Cincinnati. So in the moment, Staley, it was called like a fireable offense, which again, I think Michaels and Collinsworth have some blood on their hands for that one. Watching it all play out, it's like, what is he doing? What is he doing? But at that point, we don't know anything. Staley doesn't know anything. We don't know if the Raiders are actually going to take a knee. We don't know that. I know David Carr, when asked by Michelle Tafoya after the game, said, hey, how did that factor in? And he said, oh, it definitely did. It definitely did. If you really break down the full answer, Carr's answer is basically a throwaway answer. It's him being like, oh, you mentioned that. Okay. Because look, I've done this for a living. I know when guys answer stuff almost to be polite and carrying off the transition from my question into their answer. Because it's just as Carr said, well, it definitely played into the, factored into our decision-making there when the Chargers decided to go ahead and call that timeout in 3rd and 4. So now we have to run a play. People that thought the Chargers were the dumbest people ever, the people that thought that the Chargers and Staley were so stupid, which I think there's some motivation to hope that they're stupid, because there's so many people that were annoyed with Staley in the analytics, and some of the other decisions that they had earlier in the game. They're like, this fucking guy, now he's got, genius over here is calling a timeout now, and the Raiders were going to take a knee. Again, we don't know that the Raiders are going to take a knee. Staley doesn't know if the Raiders are going to take a knee. And even though Carr said it factored in, he then completely contradicts himself in the same quote by saying, well, yeah, but we still wanted to go ahead and win this football game, which definitely made sense because the Raiders would be motivated to win the football game again, so they didn't have to play the Chiefs. And yes, I know that Cincinnati, exactly, like that wasn't a great matchup, but let's just all be honest with each other here. Everybody would rather play Cincinnati than the Chiefs in a playoff game. Okay. All right. So that part of it. Now, there was also another element where it's like, well, wait a minute. If you were all about wanting to play the Chiefs, then why were you running certain plays the way you were running plays? I don't know how believable all that stuff is. Bisaccia, the head coach of the Raiders, was asked about it, said, hey, we were talking about it. We were talking about it. Definitely. He didn't say anything in his quotes that I saw from his presser that made it definitive. Because there was even a part of me last night that's thinking, okay, let's never underestimate just wanting to win a football game. All right, let's not underestimate the part where it's a bunch of guys in a roster that bought into the interim head coach for an organization that's gone through a ton of stuff this season, that maybe they just wanted to go ahead and win this thing. So if you're watching last night still thinking, and I think motivated a little bit by the broadcast reaction to the Staley timeout, that, oh my gosh, the Chargers just cost themselves a chance at a tie and then to go into the playoffs because their coach is I don't know, fucking young Sheldon over there, that's not really what it was. And there's always this Occam's razor thing, which again was hilarious when Brian Windhorst brought up the concept of Occam's razor on Mike and Mike, and everybody's like, what the hell are you talking about? But here it is. And it works all the time. The simplest answer is probably the right answer. If you go back and listen to Staley's comments, again, not in the moment. Now that we have all of the information, we've seen all the different stuff flying around. But like, why would Staley call a timeout? And he explained it really simply. At that point, we think they're still trying to run the ball. All right. We didn't like our run defense. I wanted to change our run defense to stop them and then give them a decision to have to make a really hard field goal. All right? Or then just decide to take the knee because they were under the play clock. And that's really, I think, all it comes down to. And in the moment, it was kind of hard to figure that out. And if you figured it out, all the credit to you. But you can't have Staley, you can't criticize Staley for him not knowing what the Raiders were doing when the Raiders were kind of just discussing it all. And the Carr quote, even though it felt like the smoking gun, and I thought it was when I saw just the clip until I was like, let me go see the whole thing. And then I saw the whole thing and I go, hey, look, I think the Raiders to sit there at 3rd and 4 in their formation, based on what Mitchell Schwartz said about the left tackle, about how they changed the formation when they saw the personnel change, that they're probably still going to run a play there. It just felt like after sleeping on it and seeing everything that was going on around it, once we were able to put it all together, it's a mistake, but it was a mistake based on the fact that they didn't stop a running back. If they stuff Jacobs and they run the clock, this game's over, and they're both in the playoffs, and we're never talking about that timeout.